Well, let me kick off and thank everybody for joining. I'm Iain Guest from the Advocacy Project here in Washington. The Glasgow Conference on Climate Change just came to an end, as we all know. President Kenyatta, when he was talking to the conference, said that already extreme weather is costing Kenya between 5 and 6% of the country's GDP per year, which is quite astonishing. And it's going to get much worse in the next few years if we can't bring down greenhouse gases. Sub-Saharan Africa contributes maybe 0.5% to the world's greenhouse gases, but Sub-Saharan Africa is getting hammered by climate change. What we are going to be looking at today is the impact of climate change on local communities, those people and groups that are on the front line, the people who are most directly affected by climate change, and are also guardians, if you like, for want of a better term, of their ecosystems. So they're our best, in fact, our last line of defense in many cases against climate change. And we're going to take a particular look at pastoralists in northern Kenya. The UN Secretary General referred to a climate action army in his closing remarks. And we're very, very fortunate today to have three, I won't say soldiers in that army, but three campaigners who really know the issues extremely well, who are going to share their thoughts with us. We're first of all going to hear from Hilary Bukuno and Monica Kinyua in Kenya. Hilary is from the Gabra tribe in the north. He has spent most of the last 20 years working to build peace between warring tribes in the north of Kenya. He is extremely experienced, as well as coming from the pastoralist community. He has an MA from the University of Peace in Costa Rica. I won't go on too long about your credentials, Hilary, because that will take most of the meeting. Monica is another co-founder of Children Peace Initiative Kenya, which is the organization that Hilary and Monica both run and have founded. We also have with us Elizabeth Hume, who's the acting Chief Executive Officer of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, which is the largest, I guess, network of peace builders and organizations working on peace. I think, Elizabeth, it's 181 nations, is it? A community of 30,000 people, most of them local and locally based. So we're just delighted that Elizabeth can join us as well. What we're suggesting in terms of the format is that Monica and Hilary will start telling us about the crisis. So part one of this presentation will be about the crisis, the impact of climate change on pastoralists and conflict in northern Kenya. We'll then pause. We'll flip back to Elizabeth for comments and maybe open up the discussion a little bit. And then we'll go back to Monica and Hilary for part two, where they will explain their model for dealing with this problem. And it's, I'm sure, going to be a very, very good presentation. So, Monica and Hilary, I'm going to pass over to you now. So if you'd like to open your presentation, that would be great.
All right. Thank you so much, Iain, and good morning, good evening, the team. I know we have a diverse team from different time zones, and we really appreciate your time tonight and this morning to take time to hear about the story of pastoralists and climate change and the innovations that we have over here to mitigate climate change. The first section, as Iain has explained, we are going to share the stories from the ground. We have been working among the pastoralist community in Samburu County. This is just a sample of the county where we have been working in, but the demonstrations in this presentation represent the rights of pastoralists in different places in Kenya and how they are struggling with climate change and its direct impact on their livelihood. So welcome.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is on the right is me, Hilary, during one of our field activities with the community in Samburu and Baringo.
And on the other side, this is me with the two Samburu women in one of the projects we were implementing in Samburu County. These women have been part of our beneficiary team, and we will share some of their stories in this presentation today.
We say we are going to share with you the challenges pastoral communities are experiencing In one of our trips to the north, we encountered this carcass of a cow. And this shows how drought has been increasing, and also how drought is becoming perennial in northern Kenya and among the pastoral communities. And when drought comes, it directly affects their livelihood.
And this is just one episode. There were much more of this kind of scaring images of the pastoralists and the crisis they are going through with the drought. This is the map of Samburu County with Baragoi sub-county, where we have been focusing our program on. And this is where the experiences of the climate change and its impact on pastoralists have been derived from. Most of the conflict in this zone is between Turkana and Samburu communities. Here is Kanyakera. Kanyakera is a reformed or a transformed warrior. He has been involved in so many rights among the Pokot and Samburu communities, but after going through our program, which we'll be sharing in the second section, he became transformed, and now he has been sharing information about how herders have been experiencing the wrath of climate change and conflict at the same time.
Here, the experience we are sharing here today is the experience we got from the community after sharing with them and asking them the challenges they are facing today. Pastoralism is a way of life based on livestock production. Pastoralists depend on cows, camels, and other livestock for survival. And to them, this is their wealth, this is their money, this is their bank. On top of that, pastoralists also keep these animals for cultural purpose. There are some cultural practices, cultural events that cannot take place without this livestock. So they use these animals to propagate their culture. Also, animals for them is food, milk, meat, and blood. They've been surviving on this in their life.
And so when climate change hits the pastoralist, it hits their entire way of life. When the cows are not able to get enough grass, the food, the milk, and the blood, everything that the pastoralists rely on is threatened. So when we talk of the severeness of climate change on pastoralism, is because it is hitting the center of the way of life. Another serious crisis among the pastoralist community is the challenge of water. In our recent trip to Samburu County, we encountered these two warriors. They have dug shallow wells to feed their animals. And within a very short radius, we saw 8 more shallow wells. And what these warriors are not in touch with is what these shallow wells mean to the crops with deeper roots that rely on shallow wells for survival. So as they struggle to get water, the plants start drying off, and the animals at the end have nothing to eat.
Scarcity of water because of drought is becoming common in pastoral areas. The other ponds dry fast, the rivers dry up. And what is happening nowadays, which is also causing more problem, so many boreholes are being sunk. And when so many boreholes are sunk, water tables fall, vegetation disappear, and desertification increases. So this is one of the effects of the climate change that is directly linked to scarcity and shortage of water.
This is Mr. Ngamia. Mr. Ngamia is one of our long beneficiaries of the program in Samburu County. Unfortunately, Mr. Ngamia lost half of his herds of cattle through the drought. And what he's leaning on, you can see I emaciated few cows. And his experience is just a representation of what many other pastoralists are going through. Something that used to be huge is now shrinking with time. And at the end, the cows have nothing to eat, and his future is threatened and at stake.
A shortage of water affects the cows. In normal times, pastoralists take 2 to 3 days to take the cows to water. But nowadays, because of scarcity of water, in some areas, cows wait for 9 days to get water because the water is not there. So what they are doing, they are tracking water. I have an experience of my brother in the north. He has 50 cows, and he says every week he uses $250 to get his cows water. So they are spending so much money, so much investment to sustain the cows, which is their only source of income and livelihood. And in the end, when the drought becomes perennial and becomes long, even the body condition of the cows because of the body condition of the cows, they even don't get enough money when they sell the cow. So the investment is not worth the returns because of the current drought situation and climate change.
And to get the $250 to feed the rest of the cows with water, you need to sell 1 or 2 cows. So at the end, it's like give and take. You are selling cows to buy food or water to sustain the cows. These are Maasais, and they are milking blood. And as we mentioned previously, blood, milk, and meat are the food for the pastoralist. Years back, when the animals were stronger, the grass was greener, it could have been easier to milk the blood from the cow and still the cow can survive. But today, because of the impact of climate change, the animals are so weak and you cannot no longer harvest blood and still have something to keep after harvesting blood. So the traditional food for the pastoralist is at the risk of extinction. The blood, the milk, and the meat, the quality is gradually going down and the food itself is disappearing.
Most of the areas where pastoralists live are dry, and the most common food is meat. During the drought, the body condition of the cows are very weak. You even don't get meat in the food, and it becomes a very big challenge, especially for children and even for elders who don't get milk.
And this is the reality of most of the arid and semi-arid areas who have been hardly hit by the impact of climate change. The green grass has disappeared. And as we saw in the previous slide, the desperation of Mr. Ngamia, this is the situation of many other pastoralists. Where do we feed the animals? What will the animals eat? At the end, what is left is the grass that has no nutrients to keep the animals going.
In the past, they say during the normal drought, you get all the cows, all the goats dying. But today, because most of the time, animals are grazing on dry grass, even the young animals are dying. And also, because of the rainfall pattern and distribution, if let's say there is rain in one area, all the cows of the community go there, and then overgrazing and degradation of land happens because of overcrowding and overgrazing of animals in the place where there's rain, or the few places where there rains.
Women have not been left behind. Their role in the family has completely changed with the impact of the climate change. As men and young men migrate with the animals, women are left alone to fend for their children. As they migrate to look for greener pastures, women have to look for alternative way of sustaining their families. And every time we go to Baragoi and other places in Samburu County, we are met with the desperate faces of women who are now retiring to crushing stones for sale to sustain their families. Initially, kitchen gardens could come in handy, but now the water to sustain the kitchen garden is no longer available, making life even more harsh for women who have the children and the men and the family and household to take care of.
Charcoal, we see these are something new and increasingly happening. Because of loss of livestock due to drought, many warriors now have limited number of cows to shepherd, cows to herd. Instead, now they are cutting trees to burn charcoal for sale in order to have impact. This is becoming a new challenge because of climate change among the pastoralist areas. Another major crisis, which is on the increase, is conflict. Conflict because livestock depend on pasture and water. And because of the distribution of rainfall, sometimes where two communities live side by side, it rains in one area and there's no rain in the other. So the herders have to cross boundary to go to the territory of other communities, and in the process, raids and conflict occur. The number of raids and conflict have increased because of this. They also buy guns in order to protect the few remaining cattle. So instead of spending money for survival, they're using them to buy guns and ammunition to protect their animal. In Baragoi, where we were working in 2019, 31 people died in 6 months. And recently, in one raid, 14 people lost their life. Conflict is worsening the impact of climate change on pastoral community. The vulnerability to climate change is worsened by conflict because the conflict itself is related to climate change.
And we can see the desperate scenario of losing 14 lives in one raid because of conflict. And the dynamic is that most of these pastoralists, they invaded the neighboring land looking for greener pasture. And so if we are able to come up with a way out towards addressing the issue of cooperation between the two communities, we can be able to reduce this kind of number of deaths because every life counts. Finally, the pastoralists are scared and uninformed. As we talked with the women and men in Samburu and among the Samburu and Turkana communities, they could say they are realizing that the green grass is no longer there, the water levels are going down, the temperatures are rising and becoming harsh for both human and animals, and they are not able to relate where is all this coming from. They don't know what is happening. They can only see the unfair changes that are happening to their animals. The resilience of the animals to drought is going down. And these two women were saying, we are scared. We don't know how the future of our children will look like if the situation doesn't get better. We don't know how everything changed. And pastoralist communities need to be informed of what is happening. Somebody needs to give a name to what they are experiencing. They rely on environment and their livelihood has been threatened by climate change. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Monica and Hilary. I mean, that really was a fabulous presentation. And I think everyone who's attending this meeting will see from that just how special Monica and Hilary are. I mean, how deeply they know this community. So this is the bad news. Remember, part 2 of this discussion is going to be the good news. But let's bring Elizabeth Hume in at this point, if we could. Liz, if we can call you that. I mean, you've had a remarkable career. I was looking at your CV last night, your bio on the website. 20 years of working in some very tough places: Bosnia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Senegal, working on peace building. Probably one of the foremost practitioners on this whole issue, and as we said earlier, acting CEO of the Alliance of Peacebuilding, which is an international network. So, Liz, I think the best thing is just hand over to you, and let's get your take on this.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. That was a really lovely introduction. I don't know if it's all true, but thank you. That was incredibly lovely. Yeah, and just to step back, just so people know, the Alliance for Peacebuilding is a membership-based organization. It's made up of organizations, many of whom are on this call today, and we're so grateful for everyone's work to push the peacebuilding field forward, build the field. That's really what our goal is. You know, when I started doing this work in the 1990s, you know, if you said the peace building field or conflict resolution, people would kind of look at you like, not sure what that is. So, you know, the work that we've all done together in the last 2 to 3 decades has really been incredible, but there's a lot more work to do. I also put in the chat our conference is coming up in January, starting on the 26th. And the title is COVID, Climate, and Conflict. I might have gotten those out of order. And it's talking about the disruption in our world, and climate is front and center. So I want people to understand how critical this issue is. And so let me step back and keep talking about some of the problems. We will move to the solutions. But before I even say that, I just want to thank Monica and Hilary, because we tend to talk about these things very up here at the 30,000 foot. And the stories you told brought it down into why this is so important. We know that climate is affecting countries and regions differently. And in countries where, they're more robust and wealthier, and sometimes climate change might not have a negative impact, they can adapt and be resilient. And so what we're talking about here are some of the areas and the regions that are conflict affected, where climate change will have the biggest impact. So thank you for that, for bringing that story and giving it life, because it's so easy to just talk about it statistically. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about it statistically and go back into July of this last year. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, made up of more than 200 of the world's leading climate scientists, finalized a report summarizing how Earth's climate has already changed, and talked about what we can expect for the rest of the century. We know climate is changing, and it's responsible for more and more extreme and deadly weather patterns, evidenced by the deadly forest fires here in the United States, the hottest June in 100 years in the US, deadly flooding in Asia and Europe, and as Monica and Hilary so eloquently talked about, the extreme droughts in Africa. People are afraid, and they should be. But I really want to make this connection. There's been a lot of, I don't want to say naysayers, but not wanting to link climate and conflict. It was, even going back to the Syrian conflict, there's a report out there, it was about in 2012, 2013, that I think was one of the first times linking the drought to the climate in the conflict in Syria. And we now know climate change, the crisis, is an emergency for conflict-affected and fragile states. And climate change, violent conflict, and fragility and violence are interconnected issues. So I'm going to say that again. Climate change, violence, and conflict, fragility, they are interconnected issues. They compound each other. We need to say that over and over and over as a community. That has to be our talking point. We know that climate change, it can destabilize social conditions. It hinders effective climate change responses, climate adaptation, climate hazards. The World Bank estimates the effects of climate change could push an additional 100 million people below the poverty line by 2030. We know economic grievances are a big driver of conflict. And analysts predict by 2050, if fragile states do not receive enough climate financing, 200 million people will need humanitarian aid. And we already know 1 in 33 people, the highest figure since World War II, need humanitarian assistance and protection. Reports predict that over 50% of the world's population by 2050 will be water stressed. And over the past 40 years, over 1/3 of global cropland has been abandoned due to erosion. These statistics should be frightening to all of us. Coupled with that, the world is facing an urgent, violent conflict crisis. We have a global violent conflict problem. I'm going to say that again. We have a global violent conflict problem. And we have these two issues that are interconnected and they compound each other. So since 2010, the number of major violent conflicts have tripled. In 2020, there were 220 violent conflicts and 40 full-scale and limited wars recorded. This is an increase from 2019, when there were only 196 violent conflicts. On top of all of this, we have COVID-19. It's more than just a health crisis. It's destabilizing, and it has also taken resources away and attention. So where do we, what do we do here? We know that climate change, violent conflict, fragility, when these combined, they compound the threats and exacerbate the risks. And of the 39 states with the highest or high fragility, 26 have a large number of people or a large proportion of the population facing high climate risk. So how problematic is this? We also know that climate change, through interaction with other pressures and contextual factors, creates 7 compound risks: local resource competition, livelihood security and migration, extreme weather events and disasters, volatile food prices and provisions, transboundary water management, sea level rise and coastal degradation, and unintended effects of climate policies. Climate change impacts the distribution of resources between groups, put additional pressures on poorly functioning governance systems, and reduces institutional legitimacy and effectiveness that impairs countries from adapting, mitigating, and addressing climate risk. And this is really, really problematic, again, for conflict-affected and fragile states. It's already difficult for, quote unquote, Western countries or countries that have that are wealthy. We also can look at environmental injustice, including how climate change systemically impacts communities of color, even in our own countries, in the United States, and around the world. So I'm going to stop there because I really wanted to just hammer home this compounding issue of climate and conflict, and how critical it is that the international community and donors focus on it. COP26, a lot of the criticism around it is that it didn't bring the crisis to it. At the same time, under our new administration here in the US, we're seeing climate change being put front and center. My biggest concern, though, a lot of it talks about reduction of emissions and isn't integrating the conflict component that Monica and Hilary so extremely well outlined. And that is one of my biggest concerns, and that we can talk about in the next session. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very, very much, Liz. And I would just add that Liz is the co-author of an extremely good recent report by the Wilson Center, and we will make sure that you get that link. It really is, as I said to her yesterday, it's a great report, and it's also very scary. I mean, everything about this subject is scary. And Liz, I do really appreciate this point that conflict, climate change, they compound each other. I mean, we referred, I think, in a recent piece to a sort of lethal cocktail of these drivers. It's very, very difficult to disaggregate them and deal with them all 1, 2, 3 separately, precisely because it is a cocktail, and that makes it even more of a challenge. Before we get on to the second part and we start getting a bit more positive and look at solutions, I want to ask Professor Nunn from Harvard, who has joined us, if he could talk a little bit about his research into pastoralists. And Nathan, I was looking at one of your pieces the other day, and you talk about the honor culture and how that contributes towards conflict. And I'm wondering, are we giving pastoralists a pass here? Are we simply saying that they're under so much pressure from climate change and other pressures that the violence is, if you like, not their fault? Do we need to take maybe a deeper dive into the culture of pastoralists and come up with something maybe a little less positive? We very much welcome your thoughts on that.
Great. Yeah, so I'm happy to just talk for 1 or 2 minutes on the research that I've done. On that specific question, yeah, that's a good point, and a good thing to think about is this history of honor cultures that are associated with pastoralism, and this has been researched in psychology in particular. I think what we find is, we haven't looked at that question specifically, but one thing that we've found in our research, which we'll probably talk about in the next little bit, is how policies exacerbate these issues. So, and in particular, the first thing we do is estimate or look at the link between climate shocks or drought and conflict. And along the lines of what Elizabeth was saying, that's statistically, it's a tough connection to make. And one thing that we find is, well, the location of the droughts is often or typically not the location where the conflict occurs. So think of droughts occurring in the territory of transhuman pastoralists or of seasonally nomadic pastoralists. What this often induces is migration to other territories, and then conflict occurs in those other territories, particularly territories that are more fertile, so farmland. So you'll get the location of the shock and then the location of the conflict be different locations. And so it's really hard to link those two. And Elizabeth was talking about how, people are skeptical that there is a link, in part because it's statistically hard to look at the connection. So we look at the link between droughts in the territory of pastoralists, and then how that leads to conflicts in nearby lands, particularly farmlands. And there's a lot written about this in the media. But the one thing that we do also look at, and this is what we're moving forward to try and understand better, and we'll probably talk about in the next minutes, is, well, how does policy help or hurt this actually? So if you think of a lot of policies, and there's a database called Aid Data where you can go through and look at what have been the aid policies since 1947. The vast majority are oriented towards farmers and to try and help farmers, help agricultural lands, even to help nomadic pastoralists transition to being farmers. And our analysis seems to indicate that hurts, if anything. And the logic is, well, as the Sahel is creeping, as there's things are becoming drier, if anything, the more suitable way of subsistence is pastoralism and agriculture. So, but instead we seem to be promoting the use of more agriculture, more irrigation techniques, rather than the opposite, right? And so nomadic pastoralism is a highly flexible way of life that can actually respond, because you can move your cattle to different areas. So it is actually kind of in some ways an ingenious traditional system. And then the symbiotic relationship between farmers and nomadic pastoralists, where they'll use the land while the crops are fallow, is kind of again another ingenious system that's evolved over time. So that's one thing that we're finding so far. And then the other thing is that the interests of the pastoralists often aren't reflected in the national government, in part because of representation of pastoralists or pastoral ethnic groups in the national government. And so if you look at where these shocks have the biggest effects, so where climate leads to conflict through this channel of conflict between pastoralists and farmers, it tends to be in countries where pastoralists don't have a voice in national government. I think that's related to the policies and related to the things that we're going to talk about next. So I'll stop there so we don't get too far ahead of us, but that's kind of the types of things we've been thinking about. And we don't have all the answers yet. We're just looking at the data from a very macro perspective and seeing what did the data seem to be consistent with. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Nathan. When you do get the answers, you need to share them with us, and hopefully it won't take you too long.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot in your comments, I think, which come back to Hilary and Monica's presentation, particularly this idea of migration, forced migration, if you like, moving into the territory of other tribes because you're looking for better pasture, more water, and the rest of it. And I thought your point, Nathan, about it's sort of almost inherent in the nomadic pastoralist model, but they are resilient, they are flexible, they can move. And that mobility, I think, it helps to explain how they can help us to build some kind of resistance to climate change. And, you know, this whole discussion, I think, raises enormously interesting ethical as well as policy issues. Can the world afford to allow nomadic pastoralism in its current shape and form? Will it survive even? I mean, I think these are the kind of big existential questions which we're being faced with. Okay, so everyone is now completely scared and freaked out. What we're going to now do is to move to part 2 and look at some solutions. And once again, we're going to go back to our presenters, our friends from Kenya, Hilary and Monica. And I am going to share my screen again with them, and hopefully, oh no, I don't need to share my screen, sorry, they need to share their screen. There we go, wonderful. Okay, Hilary and Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Iain, for transiting us to the next session. I think the next session has more hope. We are trying to talk of things that have worked in the past, where we have been working among the pastoralist communities and how we see them interrelated or connected to climate change. And I also want to appreciate the comments that have come from the panelists and the participants also. So in the next session, we are looking at the response. What at CPI, Children Peace Initiative Kenya, what have we been doing? And at Children Peace Initiative Kenya, we have been working with children. Children at the core of accessing the community, or as our entry point to the community. One characteristic that has most of the pastoralists is that there is inter-ethnic animosity, most of which is based on scarce resources, competition, and also animosity due to their ethnic identity. So we have been looking into how can we access these communities, introduce our peace model, and at the end, be able to solve multi-dimensional approaches or problems, starting with conflict and also addressing or mitigating climate change. And this is what we want to share with you now. So what do we do with children? We mobilize children from the neighboring communities, and through them, we access the elders, the warriors, the parents who are men and women, all this diverse group of people. We want to build interdependence. We want to transform the relationship that has been aggressed by inter-ethnic animosity, but through which, if transformed, they can be able to work together, get connected with each other, and at the end, see how they can survive the impact of climate change together. So at the end is to end conflict and to mitigate climate change.
Our peace building program starts with children. And in this picture, these are children who participated in our program. They became friends. And in this photo, they are sharing gift. And the gift they are sharing is a traditional calabash that is particular only to one community. But the neighboring community also like the calabash. So when the children from this community come for programs, they are given calabashes to take home. And especially the women, the mothers are very, very, very happy to have this kind of gifts. So as Monica said, we work with children as an entry point to access the adults, especially their parents. And to do this, we work in frontline villages. You know, frontline villages are villages on the border of two warring communities. So we try to connect the villagers of these two communities to live in peace. And if they accept to live in peace, then it is possible for people from other places not to come and interfere with them. So we bring children from two communities in peace camp, and we make them friends for peace, and deliberately send them to their family so that they can make their families friends. We also organize stayovers for parents and children. These people have been fighting, some of them for 50 years, 60 years. They never go to the territory of the other family. But through this interaction, through this connection, we've been able to make these families, these children, to interact, visit each other, stay in each other's homes overnight. This is what our approach does. We've worked with 21,000 direct beneficiaries, including children, elders, warriors, and that is how we try to make these communities become friends, work together. We are using a theory of conflict called contact hypothesis theory.
And it is also good to mention that everything is tailored on children. We start with children in the peace camp. We bring 150 Pokot, 150 Samburu, and together they become friends, connect them with their families. And through the children, we're able to access their parents, the warriors, the elders. Everything starts with the children and from family as a center or point of focus. Women are mothers to the children in the program. Conventionally, most peace meetings used to only target a particular group of people, mostly men. But in our program, we have incorporated women who qualify to attend the peace meeting as mothers of the children in the program. This is Mama Caleb. Mama Caleb is one of the beneficiaries of our program from Samburu Pokot Conflict Corridor. And behind her is her homestead, is her house. And she shares with us how she could dig a trench in her house so that a stray bullet will not hit any of her children when they are sleeping at night. And she has experienced behind her lovely face are memories of the threat of conflict. But today, she's a happy woman because she doesn't need to dig a trench for her children to sleep anymore, because now the peace has been restored. And now they are thinking of how can we sustain the friendship. Women connect with each other from different communities. They give strength to the friendship already introduced by their children, and also they influence their husbands, who in this case, the husband could either be warriors or elders. So everything is centered on children, and from children, it trickles down to the other members of the community. Mama Caleb's story just reflects one among the many stories of women and men of the Pokot and Samburu communities in Northwest Kenya.
We also work with the warriors. This is a picture of a warrior and his family in one of the villages we work. And some of these warriors are also parents. And warriors are key to peace as they are to conflict. So what we try to do, we try to connect warriors across two communities so that they give up raiding, become friends and give up raiding. We also engage them in alternative livelihood, where warriors from two communities do business together, know each other, and in the process also help in mitigating emerging conflict. Like when livestock are stolen, they help to return, and so that peace prevails between the two communities.
We have also introduced business entrepreneurship among the warriors so that they can see the need to protect their businesses and shun from stealing. They trade with animals. And in the process of trading with animals, they build better relationship with warriors from the other side. And at the end, we are seeing most of them protecting and focusing on business than stealing and raiding, something that has helped safeguard life and also improve on their livelihood. These are the elders in Samburu community. And these elders, some of them are fathers to the children we work with. Some are grandparents to the children we work with. And they are very key in matters of peace and conflict.
Elders make decisions about conflict and even peace. So they have been so instrumental in resolving emerging conflict. And the elders who joined us, because of the children, have been very, very passionate to make sure that conflict doesn't escalate in the frontline villages, because they feel now they are friends with their neighboring community.
And the same elders are the ones who give go ahead and access to the warriors from the other community to come and graze in their zone. So creating this kind of interdependence is really playing a great role in helping the pastoralist community survive with the threat of climate change. Another key group that we engage in our work are the security forces. Although they are under-resourced and there's still much more that is needed as our responsibility to the civil society, we realize that most of the relationship between the police and the local looks like us versus them. And the locals are playing the defense mode. The police seems like they are there to attack and the relationship is not good at all. So our program came in and started now to see how can we help the community and the police forces to realize that they are fighting the same enemy. They are trying to restore peace. And through engaging the police and the community, we have seen collaboration and cooperation in returning of the animals, the stolen animals, in handling the conflict so that it doesn't get to violent stage, and in helping the community stay in harmony by differentiating between inter-ethnic animosity and the criminals who may hide behind the name in the community. So this is also one of the aspects that has really helped sustain peace in the area.
As a result of this intervention, we have seen great level of friendship between the communities we are working with. Because in a village, you have maybe 500, 600 family, the next village with the same number of family. So the whole community have become friends. In the process, sharing of resources became possible. Especially the Pokot and Samburu have been sharing resources for the last 10 years. If it rains on the Pokot side, the Samburus take their cows to the Pokot side. If it rains on the Samburu side, the Pokot do the same. This innovation has encouraged sharing of resources. Also, children are sharing schools. Women, like in many African villages, maybe one village has more infrastructure, like one has a health center, the other one has no health center from the other community. We've enabled women from Pokot community access health services in Samburu.
The photos we see is the head teacher and the deputy head teacher of Baragoi Primary School, one of the schools we have seen in bringing in both Samburu and Turkana children. The rest of the school in this zone are very cosmopolitan. They only have one group of people, one group of community attending schools. And so we have seen, courtesy of the Peace Project, the schools opening up to inviting children from the other community to study with children from this other community, something which has more ripple effects. Also here we have one of the nurses in a clinic called Longewan. It is in the Samburu zone and the Pokot do not have a similar facility. Courtesy of the friendship and the relationship between mothers, we have seen Pokot women, especially the pregnant women, being able to access the services and reducing the maternal deaths. So many ripple effects from the improved relationship between the members of the two neighboring communities. We have also seen economic cooperation, especially because of the mobile money, which in Kenya is making transactions so easy. This is Mama Sangaire. Her name is Josephine. And Josephine has so many friends from the Pokot side. She's a Samburu, courtesy of the Peace Project. And most of the women in the Pokot side use her M-Pesa business and her posho meal business for their own livelihood, courtesy of the improved relationship that was not there before. And her experience or her story is one among many. We have seen women thriving in business, courtesy of the peaceful coexistence between the two neighboring communities.
And because of coexistence and interdependence, we have market days in neighboring villages. One day on the Samburu side, another day on Pokot side. This is also becoming a connector and a reason for these communities to interact. When a Samburu go to the market in Pokot area, they are meeting friends, they are meeting families who are friends to their children, and they are welcomed. And when the Pokot go on the other side, they experience the same hospitality because they are now friends. Another
punchline I see from courtesy of the project is to see the women cooperation between Pokot and Samburu women in raising the animals together. As we check out the community to go to another different conflict zone, we give one heifer to be shared among the two families. And the image we see here is a Pokot and Samburu woman showcasing the heifer they received to raise together. As a result, we have seen people safeguarding each other, reduction in raiding because you don't want to raid where your friends' cows are, and they also don't want to do the same. And also, we have seen continuous interdependence, which has many other ripple effects.
Heifers for Peace is our own innovation. After 2-3 years of friendship and building trust, the two communities are able to take care of each other's animals. And this is also an exit strategy for our peace building program. Even after we go, they have all the reasons to communicate with each other, to ask each other about their heifers, and peace is built.
So we have been able to achieve a lot, but not alone. We have worked hand in hand with the Advocacy project, and we appreciate their presence in this Zoom meeting today. And through them, we have been able to receive Peace Fellows. Here we have Tali Dick. She's one of the participants today. Hi, Tali. And also behind him, we have Michael, who is a student from Tangaza College, one of our collaborating universities. And through them, we have been able to get a lot of stories from the ground, exposed to the world, to know what is happening. And they have also helped in fundraising and research. At the same time, we'd also want to recognize the support we received from IFA Civic and the Germany government. We could not have achieved this much more stories we are sharing today without their support. So we have to recognize their contribution and to say our big thank you. At the same time, we have worked with Caritas in different capacity. In every place we go, we try to look for local partners for collaboration. And we also recognize the good work that is also done by the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and we look forward to be part of their great job. All this and much more shows how much collaboration helps in different levels towards achieving a bigger goal.
We want to end our story by saying ending conflict equals climate change mitigation, because currently conflict is becoming a simple one major factor that is worsening the pastoralist vulnerability to climate change. Thank you very much for listening.
And at the same time, we have also realized that we are not in control of where the rain will, which side will have the rain and which side will have more higher temperatures, because climate change has disoriented all the prediction. So if we help the pastoralist community to learn to cooperate, to learn to share the resources, however minimal they are, to learn to cope with each other, they are able to help each other, accommodate each other, and hoping they can extend their lifestyle by 1 year or 2 by sharing the resources for their own good and good of their animals. Thank you so much. Back to you, Iain.
Okay. Well, that was absolutely terrific, I must say. So interesting. I mean, it was really, really great presentation. And you can tell why our own little organization is so excited to be able to work with Monica, Hilary, and their team. Could we flip back now to Liz, our other main presenter? Liz, maybe we could just ask you to comment on this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Project.
I wonder if somebody can mute. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. So once again, I think this presentation hits at the need for local interventions. There is a lot of discussion in the last couple of years on locally led, locally owned. We have gotten this principle locally led in the Global Fragility Act. the UN Sustaining Peace Agenda. It's in the World Bank Fragility Strategy. Ambassador Powers from USAID just last week talked about 25% of funding should go to local organizations. But we have to be able to do it, right? So it means that you have, from an operational perspective, the donors have to change the way they work, accept more risk in procurement, have smaller awards. But I think this presentation highlights how critical that is. And how do we put that policy into action? So the first thing I'm going to just say once again is the importance of locally led, and how this presentation really highlights that. That I think is one of the biggest recommendations of how to move forward in programming in this area. But I'm going to step back again from a larger issue. And when we have been doing the research and looking at how do you integrate conflict and climate change, it seems easy, it seems logical, but that's not the way our development assistance, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the UN or USAID or other donors, it's not the way our development system works. Our development system is very siloed, and that's what we're trying to get at with the Global Fragility Act. How do you ensure integration, comprehensive integrated approaches? And this is going to be incredibly critical for climate change, conflict, and fragility. Again, how do you make sure a comprehensive integrated approach? And there's some things that are universal that are problematic from the development perspective, and then there's things that are very unique for climate change and conflict. So one, somebody wrote in the chat, change your policymakers. Well, the United States just did that. And, in the previous administration, we couldn't even say the word climate change. Under the Biden administration, they're putting it central into their foreign policy, and that's really critical. However, I'm not convinced the conflict piece is making its way in there. Their implementation strategy is open for comment right now. Even today, we're working on how do we comment on that strategy. So I encourage people to take a look at that and how you can comment on it, and make sure that the conflict prevention and the climate change is integrated. This is a really important time to make sure that we get this policy right. And it's dependent on all of us to make sure that our voices are heard on this issue. But at the same time, on the conflict side, the conflict prevention side, we need to make sure that we understand the climate change crisis and can speak to each other. And it means we're going to have to bring climate scientists in, and we're going to have to understand it. And they're going to have to understand our language, and we're going to have to understand theirs. And we're going to have to work really closely together on it. It's not education. It's not, livelihoods where people feel more comfortable in that sector. Climate change is going to involve more science, and we're going to have to be comfortable in that. And that's, it's also, I would put it up there with the technology piece, right? It's a bit harder, but we're going to have to be able to talk with each other across these two sectors, and then understand that it touches and concerns so many things, as Hilary and Monica talked about: food security, livelihoods. I know, Iain, you talked about the fact, pastoralists, is this a way of life, and we talked about, the shock or the issue happens here, but you're seeing the conflict somewhere else. So being able to make that connection from an evidence-based piece of it. Because even though pastoralists can move, where do they move? They move onto someone else's land. And when I was in Ethiopia, some of the biggest conflicts we were seeing were between pastoralists and farmers because of encroaching on farmers' land, and then also the degradation, the environmental impact it did have on land. So, you know, that's where you were seeing some of that biggest conflict. But at the same time, you know, it's about adaptation, right? Because like we just said, some things may not continue. So we really have to look at adaptation. In Ethiopia, where I worked for a number of years, you know, coffee is one of their biggest exporters. And we know with just a slight temperature change, coffee production could get wiped out in that country. So, you know, it's going to be really important that we look at adaptation, where the environment is going to be changing, and being able to look at a 5, 10, 50-year horizon. And again, development assistance is not very good at that. We look at very short-term programmatic. So we're going to have to change that culture. I can't talk enough about conflict risk, conflict sensitivity, conflict integration, because programs have actions, even with the best intentions. You know, we have numerous examples of where, and this is not to put it on the climate community, I have my own drawer full of do no harm, where a program has exacerbated a conflict. It's really important to bring in those community dialogues and that conflict resolution to make sure that climate programs were looking at any unintended conflict risk. And that is also, I think, really an important piece of it that we need to make sure is there. I also want to talk about the issue of the fact that prioritizing human rights and activists, people that are working in regions where communities are incredibly impacted by climate change or where there are environmental threats. We know there's a disproportionate killing of Indigenous people, people at the local community that are supporting environmental activism or conservation issues. So that's something that has to be integrated into donors' policy as well. So I think those are some of my main points. You know, long-term strategy, integration, making sure that climate folks and conflict folks can talk to each other and know what they're talking about. It's not just about mitigation, prevention. You're going to have to also look at adaptation, and then also the weather shocks that we see coming. And this really gets into governance programming, making sure that governance systems are also part of the local communities, that they're effective and legitimate and can weather, I guess, not a very good, you know, since we're talking about weather shocks, but how that they can make sure that they're looking forward and able to mitigate climate hazards. So this is a very complex system. And we need to make sure that not only are our governments at all capitals are pushing to make sure that we reduce emissions so that we can stabilize climate change, but recognize that it's already here. And there are things that have to happen down from the local, the regional, and you know, at the government level in any of these countries that we're talking about at the national level. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Liz. That's great. We have another quarter of an hour, so maybe open up for questions. But before I do that, Monica and Hilary, let me just pick up this point that Elizabeth made about integration. And we've talked about this when we were traveling around this area together with Tally, who's also in on this call. You guys are teachers, you work with kids, you're wonderful at peace building, but you're not agronomists and water specialists and livestock specialists. You need to build those kind of alliances at your level and reach out to people, other disciplines that will work with you and will complement you, and will start to make some inroads into this cocktail, as we've called it earlier, of problems. And actually informing the pastoralists. I mean, you ended up the first part of your presentation by saying these people are uninformed and they're scared. And I mean, Liz's point about involving local communities. I mean, if those pastoralists do not know what the heck is going on, someone has to figure out a way to help them understand and to talk to them. And I would see your role at CPIK as being absolutely fundamental as the bridge, if you like, between the pastoralists on the one hand and NGOs and others who are further up the chain. This really is an amazingly interesting conversation, I have to say, just so rich and so extraordinary in so many different ways. I wish we had more time. We're due to finish at 12:30 our time. It's going to be very late in Kenya then. We've got another quarter of an hour. Please throw comments, questions into the chat box. We'll take a look at those. But can we open it up maybe for 2 or 3 questions, keep them concise, direct them at Monica and Hilary. Nathan, is there anything that you'd like to jump in with? And some of our friends from Africa, maybe. Let's take advantage of these last 15 minutes. How about we ask Karen, who is a friend of ours who lives in Kangemi in Nairobi, if she has any questions for our friends from CPIK. Karen, would you, or do you not want to be put on the spot there, which would be totally understandable?
Hi, everyone.
Show us yourself, Karen. Show us your.
I am walking. I've just alighted a bus. I'm heading to the house. I had to receive my call on my way home. I am walking home. I took long on the way. There was heavy traffic. That's why I didn't show off my video, but I'm almost home.
Okay, well, listen, I don't think it's fair to put Karen under additional stress if she's already commuting, but Monica and Karen, we hope you guys can connect with each other.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Nathan, would you like to jump in with some observations, maybe?
Yeah, just to reinforce what Monica, Hilary, and Elizabeth have said, which I completely agree with. So one thing that Elizabeth said was, and then the presentation by Monica and Hilary illustrates the importance of local kind of involvement. I can't remember the exact words that Hilary used, but I think one point I want to make is the reason that's so important is because all of us who are academics working in NGOs in the policy world internationally have a particular background, which is Western European, and even within countries there tends to be a focus on certain types of groups which have this history of agriculturalism, and so that's a very different perspective. It's called weird in the literature, and so to have the perspective of pastoral groups, I think is super important. And then what I really liked about the interventions of Monica and Hilary is they're focused on benefiting the pastoral groups. And so I think that's fantastic. And that's, as I mentioned, that's missing. And Beverly Thompson in the notes here says these interventions are needed in Nigeria. So Nigeria, you can contrast what Monica and Hilary were talking about with what's happening in Nigeria. I think there's 3 states in which there's a grazing ban. So you're not allowed to transport animals except by truck or train. So effectively, you're really limiting the agency or the ability of pastoral groups, and this feeds into conflict. Also, the creation of ranches, and then also the creation of conservation lands where you're not allowed to graze animals in these lands, or if you do, you have to pay a fine. And then the conservation officers, you can see how that opens the door for them to engage in corrupt practices as well. And so that also harms things. So I think just the bottom line for me is, the more you can do not to limit the actions and abilities of pastoral groups, the better off things are going to be. And in some ways, kind of the project that Monica and Hilary are talking about, it's like it's promoting mobility, promoting integration between the different groups so that they can move, so that they can exchange cattle, so that they can engage in cooperative relationships. And my sense from the anthropological literature, ethnographic literature, this was very common historically. It's become less cooperative with the introduction of guns and influx of guns over the last few decades. And so I think the projects there promoting seems like it's really trying to get us to this cooperative good equilibrium, which I think is possible. And so even in the face of climate change.
Well, Nathan, we have some homework ahead of us too. Those are really very interesting points. I mean, the tension between pastoralists and conservationists up in that part of Kenya is also very real. People have been killed, and Laikipia in particular has been a focus for that. Monica and Hilary, is there anyone you'd like to hear from? I'm wondering if we could hear from Jane, maybe Monica's sister, who is in the States and is developing a 501c3 to help promote the message of CPIK from Kenya on our West Coast. Jane, do you want to jump in here? Maybe not. But I'm sure, Monica, that she will give you a grade on your presentation later on. Anyone else who'd like to jump in here? Chris, you were a Peace Fellow for us in Africa 2 or 3 years ago. Do you have any thoughts on what you've heard today, I wonder?
Yeah, I mean, my whole thought was, we're talking about conflict today, and when I was in Uganda, we were talking about the conflict from back then, and one of the conversations was, okay, NGOs have come in, they've dropped a lot of money, the conflict is no longer the new shiny problem of the world, attention wanes, people still have to live with the ramifications and the fallout from these combats, but the resources are only around until the next big thing. So I really appreciate this talk of localization, because it really is the only way to get sustainable and long-term solutions. So, I mean, congratulations for fighting the good fight.
I wonder if we could...
Yes. We had a couple of people raising their hands, so just want to point those out to you.
Oh, we do. I was so sorry. Jonas, yes.
Jonas and Asaya as well. So
yeah.
That's good. Jonas, yes.
Yes. Thanks, Monica and Hilary, for the great work that you are doing. I think I like this conversation because I think that some of the community that are seriously hit by this climate change are the pastoralist communities, because they don't have anything to cushion them when they face drought and all that. And we have seen situation where, as it was shown, they lose their livelihood. What is more interesting in the story that we are hearing today is the impact that through this initiative, Monica and Hilary are able to create. For me, I'm highly interested in the story, how much this story should be told, because I strongly believe that what we are lacking, we are very few people here hearing this story. What we are lacking is to amplify the story of CPI, so that many people can learn from it. I believe that it's not only relevant for Kenya; it can be relevant for other contexts whereby there is inter-community conflict. So my plea is that this model can be kind of analyzed in depth and be kind of shared for people to learn from it and be able to replicate it in other contexts. Thank you. Congratulations for a good job.
Well, that's a key point, isn't it? Thanks, Jonas. Karen, you spotted another hand up, I think, did you?
Yeah, I think Asaya, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think I saw your hand up before.
Asaya, yes, maybe. Well, Jane has popped back on. Jane, would you like to comment on all of this then?
Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Isaiah.
Okay. Hope you are doing well. Through the stories, I found the link, then I joined it through. So I was sent the email, I joined it through. So first of all, as I speak here, I'm a student, and I'm also a master's student from Masai Land. So I'm happy about the topic today. I'm also an environmentalist. I do initiatives of tree plantings at schools, and even I teach people on how children or even the young generation on how to mitigate climate. And so on today's topics, I'm so interested and I've learned a lot about the conflict, on how conflict interconnect with climate change. So I'm so glad for the new faces I've seen here today, having people with the same vision, the same focus, the same mind that I usually have. So I'm so grateful today joining the Zoom meeting, and I'm likely to get connected with you guys. I'm so glad, and I know that I'm going to learn a lot from you. So as we speak now, likely, or even the last week when the COP26 as they're making inclusions and making even dreams, or even some of the agreements that have been passed there, especially when I saw people talking about on how to do with pastoralists, on how climate issue is affecting us, especially where I come from in Narok. Many people are suffering, even the livestock there, and even everything. And these climate issues has caused to an extent that there's conflict in our community. But today, I'm thankful and I'm grateful that I've learned a lot from you guys, and I know that I'm going to be back there. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the comment, Isaiah. I'm sure you'll all meet up in Kenya. I can tell this is going to be a very collegiate.
We'll give you a shuka here. This is a shuka for Maasai and the pastor. We usually wear this on as you go and look after the livestock. As you migrate to look for water because there's a lot of drought. But for now, we have learned on how to combat climate change. We educate these people on how to do tree planting projects, green projects in our community there. So as per now, is maybe like 2 years to come, our fathers will now understand on how to combat climate change because they're more affected. You find even livestock dying there as you just watch, as you look after the car. As educated persons like us now, the young people like us, as we get knowledge from you guys, we will go there to our communities and teach them on how to do with climate change and combat and even reduce the conflict that is there.
Fantastic.
So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Isaiah. Just so interesting. And we saw that at the COP meeting in Glasgow, the young people coming forward, claiming their space. And Monica and Hilary, it sounds to me as if you've got quite a constituency out there in Kenya. Maybe we could hear briefly from Jane, Monica's sister, who is another co-founder of CPI Kenya, but is on the west coast of the United States. And then we should probably think about wrapping up, maybe give the last word to Monica, Hilary, and maybe Liz as well. So Jane, over to you.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to participate on remote and so proud to be part of the initiative doing great work. Thanks to Elizabeth for her great contribution. And I would say thinking globally as we act locally, I'm seeing on how can the model be replicated to even respond to issues in other parts of the world. And thinking about how, although Northern Kenya is far, how we contribute to that, how we can be a positive change is something that has pushed me to think, how can the local community here be involved? And in line with that, as Iain mentioned, in looking forward to establish a 501c3 for CPI Kenya, we are looking for people who would like to be involved as the board, to be part of the board or part of volunteers. And I would be glad to join the forces and collaborate in different ways. And have put my contact on the chat. If you want to participate. If you want to be involved, feel free to reach out through email or text message, and we keep the conversation going. In line with the climate change, I believe we all have a role to play. So impressed to see different and diverse mindset here towards seeking solution. Thank you so much, Iain, for this platform. And I see we have a question in the chat, if we can respond to that before moving on. Thank you so much.
We do. We have a question. Thanks so much, Jane. We have a question from Annette. Annette, would you like to kind of jump in and give us your question directly?
Yes. Hello. For Monica and Hilary, fantastic presentation, and can't agree more with Liz saying that we need to come down from the 30,000 feet level and come down to the local level. I'm wondering if the local communities that have come together have addressed as individual communities this issue of peace and reconciliation officially in something like a General Assembly. Has this been addressed on the broad community level in addition to this organic relationship forming that's been so great for you?
Good question.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the comments and questions and the contributions. And thanks also, Jane, for the good work of forming the 501c3. We hope the community here, we can have 1 or 2 members joining the team, either as a board or as a volunteer, to see how we can together achieve more. Commenting on Annette's question, the communities they do not hold the general assemblies. Maybe the design is different, but I think the reconciliation and the friendship is seen in the daily way of life. For instance, initially the marketplaces were very monopolized. There were marketplaces for the one group and for the other. But now you see both communities accessing the marketplaces. So we have not seen any general assemblies addressing the newfound peace and relationship, but we have seen the way of life change over time. I can also see a question from Barbara. She's asking, is climate change strengthening the friendship between Samburu and Pokot or putting new pressure on them? I would say on some part, it is strengthening the friendship. Other part, it's putting new pressure. No wonder we need to extend to those parts where there is pressure out of climate change to help them also adapt and cope with each other, as climate change effects are here to stay for the time being. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those comments. Annette, I mean, I think your question is very interesting, but I think the message from Monica and Hilary's presentation is that if peace is going to be built between these two communities, it's going to be based upon common interests and complementarity. And that's what's really sort of creating this interdependency between these two communities that were fighting each other before. And that to me is what emerged from their presentation. So it's not about talking, about sort of organizing an assembly. It's about actually building common interests and creating interdependency and reducing the temptation and the pressure on these people to go and raid each other's cows and fight each other. And Bobby
today before we started this Zoom, we received a phone call from one Pokot members, and he was saying, we are taking care of the Samburu cows from our friends Samburu communities. Something which is really impactful if you imagine how these communities used to live some years back. And so going back to question Barbara has asked, when you see a former enemy taking custody of your animals for friendship's sake, it really strengthens the relationship. You feel like you owe them. You feel like you also need to extend that kind of kindness and gesture to them, and the relationship gets stronger. So thank you so much for this kind of question, Barbara.
Well, we have come to the end of this of our time, but I wonder if Liz, if you would like to kind of give us some sort of wrap-up thoughts on this.
That this conversation on climate change and conflict is going to be front and center, and people need to be part of the conversation, be part of the advocacy at all levels. So I encourage you all to attend PeaceCon on January 26th. Go to AFP's website and register to join the conversation. Climate change will be front and center in the conference. And I just really encourage everybody to be part of the solution.
Absolutely. Well, we will continue to keep this network alive. We'll share the recording of today's discussion. We'll also share a PDF of Monica and Hilary's excellent presentation. And if we can find the time to do the homework, we'll put together a reading list or some of the more interesting videos that we've watched, including stuff from the Glasgow conference. I mean, it's an incredibly important and rich issue. We all have to become engaged and students of this. So I think we need to roll our sleeves up and get cracking. Could I suggest maybe that the AP and CPIK team stay on? We can chat through some of the practical implications from all of this. But thank you so much to everyone for participating. Really just a great discussion. We give a round of applause to Monica and Hilary, I think.
And unmute so we can hear the applause.
There you go.
Thank you.